A very good evening and a warm welcome to Personal Finance. I'm Gugulethu Cele. Death is not an easy thing to contemplate, but for anyone with a family or dependents, planning for your death is essential, and appointing an estate executor is part of the process. But what is an estate executor? Well, joining us now to break all of this down for us is Michelle Dubois from Liberty. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Michelle. Let's get into that particular definition. An estate executor, what does their role and function actually entail?
Well, Gugu, think of it as the person who's really going to represent you on your death and who's going to be the manager of your affairs. So they are going to ultimately be the person who wraps everything up for you. So whether it is paying off those last bills, doing that last tax return, making sure that any money owing to you is paid to the deceased estate, right down to distributing assets to the beneficiaries, that is going to be their role.
How do I choose this individual?
It's very important, and I think it's something that is really underestimated, is the importance of choosing the correct executor. So you can choose anybody, but that person is going to have to prove to the Master of the High Court that they are competent and that they have the knowledge to be able to do it. And it's not an easy job. It's a big task. So you want to think quite carefully about it. You don't just want to appoint necessarily any individual, perhaps a spouse, a friend, a colleague, or somebody like that, because you have to bear in mind that those people are also going to be mourning at that point in time, and they're going through the process of grief. So now it might make that already painful process a lot more painful to have to deal with all of those bits and pieces. Some people prefer to go with a large institution where they are experts in that regard. However, then their concern is, and I'm really just being the devil's advocate here, but the concern then is that you're just a number. So you are not necessarily going to get that personal touch. So I always recommend that you have a combination of both, where you can provide a co-executor. So put somebody from the family who knows what your wishes would have been, how you wanted things wrapped up, your personal circumstances, and has got access easily to those documents, such as your will, your income tax number, etc., and then use the efficiencies and the expertise of the professional institution.
It sounds like a very important relationship to have. As you've alluded to, this person basically takes control of everything that you've owned once you pass on. How do you make sure that you maintain and monitor this relationship? Because life happens. Some people have divorces that they experience, or a fallout with either of their siblings that might be selected as a co-executor, and even the executors of your estate that you might have elected from a corporate company. What if things don't go correct there? In other words, the maintenance of this relationship.
Definitely. You know, you can appoint an attorney, for example, that was your family attorney for many years, and for the last 20 years you haven't seen or heard of this person. He might have died in the meantime, left the country. As you say, life happens. So I think it's vital for you to reassess this with your financial planner when you review your portfolio once a year. Reviewing your will should be part of that process. So at least you know on an annual basis, okay, I'm still happy with my choice, or I need to make some changes, I need to consider maybe adding somebody, removing somebody, and you can do that as part of the process of the review.
This annual meeting that you were saying that needs to take place, what does it entail? Do I need to have an executor together with a financial planner who joins me in this meeting, or other family members to help walk in preparation towards this journey?
It's not essential, but it's completely up to you, and it's going to depend largely on the complexities. If your situation is complex when you pass away, you might want to make a few people aware of what your wishes are going to be and how you want things done when you're no longer here. It sounds silly, but we can't just phone you up and say, sorry, what did you want us to do with this? You know, all we've got to go on when you've passed away is the will. And the executor is bound to give effect to the wishes that are in the will. So it's probably a good idea to discuss with the family what is going to be in my will. Some people feel that it's very personal and they would rather not. You might decide that you want to get your lawyer involved. Your lawyer might be appointed as the executor. So whatever you feel is going to meet your circumstances, you know, you really need to make it your own.
And this obviously needs full and honest disclosure from both parties, especially if you have one will with your executor, another with the bank, and maybe with another institution. That's playing it very risky, I take.
Definitely. I had a case the other day where exactly that happened. Client passed away. We were presented with 2 wills within 2 weeks of each other. Of course, the one will leaves everything to one person, the second will leaves everything to somebody else. Now, obviously, there's an issue here. We need to prove which is going to be the client's will. Not all the correct formalities have been required, so now we are litigating. We're having to go to court, and it's costing everybody money, and the only ones that are winning are the lawyers. So the more you can disclose openly up front is going to make life a lot easier when you're no longer here.
Michelle, you mentioned fees and costs, and which is obviously something that plays a big role when it comes to racking up one's estate when you pass on. Maybe if you can explain the cost that goes to the executor in planning for the preparation when you do pass on, and more importantly, the estate wrapping up cost there.
Can be quite a costly exercise, and that is why some people will nominate, for example, their spouse, because they think, well, rather than paying an attorney or another institution, I'm just going to let my spouse do it, and they're going to save on all these costs. The bottom line is a spouse, even one who is knowledgeable, who is grieving, is not necessarily going to be the right person to be able to do this process effectively. So your spouse may very well land up going to that institution and actually appointing somebody and saying, I don't know what I'm doing here, please can you help me? And there's obviously then going to be a cost involved. So you need to think very carefully about who you appoint and what your reasons are. If it's just to avoid costs, you might be running into some problems. So the executor charges a fee of 3.5% plus VAT, so that gives you an all-round fee of 3.99% on any property that he deals with. So if, for example, you're going to deal with a home that you need to sell, you've got a share portfolio that you want to liquidate, you've got policies that are payable to the deceased estate, anything that you can see the executor actually working with is what he's going to charge his fee on. So it can add up to quite a lot of money.
Exactly. Is there maybe a method in which one can prepare or save up for these costs so that once they do accumulate, it's not too much of a hefty fee that you have to pay?
And that's where the financial planning process comes into effect, because we don't want clients to pass away, be under the impression that they've left a certain amount of money for their beneficiaries to take care of them. But now we start to see all the costs eating into that money, and there's very little left over. So your executor is also going to calculate taxes that are payable, estate duty, capital gains tax, your executor's fees. It all starts to add up.
Exactly.
So after all that, you may not have very much left for your beneficiaries, which for me is really sad, because when that person did their planning, they had a plan in place to leave money to certain people. So the ideal way to do it is to see a professional financial advisor who will do all of those calculations. And unfortunately, the way we do those calculations is to assume that you pass away today. What would be the situation if I pass away today? Okay, based on my current asset base, my liabilities, etc., these are the costs that I'm going to have to pay. And we can either allocate certain assets to cover that. So we know, for example, the share portfolio is going to cover all the costs. Or you can use life policies, which is quite a nice cost-effective way of doing it. So you're paying a small premium on a monthly basis, but I know that when I pass away, a lump sum is going to pay into my deceased estate, and that is the money for my executor to then use to settle up all my bills.
Would the worst case scenario be where cancellation takes place, where someone decides, look, I've appointed this executor, but I've decided I don't need the service anymore, which actually isn't true, and then they cancel all the paperwork? I take it then they'd really suffer the harsh consequences of having the government having to wrap up their estate then.
Well, what's going to happen is that the Master of the High Court is going to have to appoint an executor for them. So the family, for example, could approach the Master's office and say, okay, I would like to be the executor. This is why I am competent to do this. And the Master will then say yes or no. So what it does do is it delays an already very long process.
And adds up to the costs.
Exactly. So the more you can sort out while you're still here without complication, the better.
I want us to look at the important documentation that one
Yes.
obviously needs. We mentioned the wills and making sure that it's up to date and placed with one particular individual, but are there other details that need to be filed and kept in a safe place?
Yes, and I think that every client needs to review this. It's something that I find is always lacking when we look at this process. I like to call it a book of life. So in there, if I disappeared off the planet today, what do you need to know about me? So here's my last tax return, for example, with my income tax number. Here's my bank account details. Think about silly things like paying the electricity bill. So let's say one spouse, for example, has always paid the electricity bill and they do it online. Okay. It happens to be a bad time of the month when you pass away and the electricity bill is now due. How do you pay that bill? Even if you know you have to pay it, you can't go online and pay it. Eskom won't change your details because you're not the authorized owner on the account. So if I can just have your login details, for example, to be able to pay those types of utilities, we've mentioned the importance of the will. For example, I also want maybe a statement of wishes. What do I want to happen to my children, for example? Would I prefer for them to stay here and attend the same schools? Would I prefer them to live with relatives? Who's going to be their natural guardian? So any information, you know, the title deed to my property, details of car ownership, absolutely anything that anybody would ever need to know about you needs to be filed in this book of life. Obviously keep it in a safe place.
Yep.
And that will make everybody's life a lot easier.
Small details which make the world of change.
Definitely.
Time now for us to recap on some of the takeaways from this discussion. Michelle, the important points that we need not forget.
I think for me, the most important thing is not to be scared by having the conversation. I think a lot of people, as silly as it sounds, by having the conversation, we seem to think it's going to happen. And I think the more prepared that we can be, the easier we're going to leave our loved ones when we do pass away. So make sure that you have an updated will. That's probably going to be my top priority, is to make sure that it's updated, that it's reviewed regularly, and that it reflects your current circumstances. If there have been any changes in the last while, you've had another baby, you're divorced, you're no longer speaking to this person in the family, make sure that your will reflects that. And then make sure that you're able to easily give effect to what is in your will. Make your executor's life easy. So make sure that there's money, probably by means of a life policy, to be able to pay all the bills, and make sure that there's information.
Ensure that all the necessary information is there, and as you say, prepare for the costs.
Definitely.
Michelle, thank you so much for your time this evening, definitely educating us on the importance of estate planning and estate executors. Well, that's where we leave it for Personal Finance tonight. A big thank you once more to Michelle Dubois from Liberty, a legal marketing specialist from that firm. Remember that we want to hear from you, so get in touch by sending us your comments on Twitter to @CNBC Africa using the hashtag Finance410, or to myself @Gugulethu on Twitter. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.